Thursday, January 2nd, 2014, 1:01 p.m. I am at my office cubicle, clawing at the papers strewn like oversized confetti on my desk, and glancing nervously at the 50s wall clock that counts away most of the hours in my life. Mr. Dixon opens the door to his office and bellows, "I promised your parents that you could work on your uncle's estate during office hours, Djurdjevic. Just don't take too long. Remember that it's pro bono. We have bills, and that means working for clients who pay. Djurdjevic, are you listening to me?" "Yes, sir." I stop. "I have that lunch with Mr. Picklejig coming up at 1 o'clock. We'll be discussing the transfer of Uncle Frank's assets into his name." Mr. Dixon looks at the wall clock, then down at his watch. "You're late. No wonder. With that mess, organisation, dear boy, discipline. A clean desk is a sign of a clean mind. Your head's obviously full of nonsense." "Yes, sir." "We'll get to it then," says Mr. Dixon, waving his hand and sighing. Moments after Mr. Dixon slams his door, Brad's opens slowly, and he peers out from behind it. "Dixon giving you a roasting, eh, mate?" Yeah. Look, Brad, have you seen Uncle Frank's file? I was sure I put it on my desk just before we left for the funeral." "Sure. All you need to do is ask." Brad disappears and comes back a moment later with a manila folder. "What the hell were you doing with it?" Well," Brad raises and lowers both eyebrows a couple of times. "You see me talking to that dark-haired beauty at the funeral?" "No, what the hell does that—" "Never mind, just give it to me. I'm late already." "That's Picklejig's lawyer. Seems he couldn't make it, so she's here instead to discuss the will. I just wanted to find out as much as I could about her. Hope you don't mind." I snatched the file away. "So Picklejig's not meeting me for lunch?" "Nope, the girl's meeting us instead, Justine Shelley. And mate, she is a stunner. Ha ha!" "No one invited you, Brad." "Oh, come on. You know I'm good at meetings. Meetings are my thing." "Why didn't she introduce herself to me at the funeral?" "I told you were too upset to talk business. She could talk to me instead. Anyhow, you're married, mate. She's no use to you. Ha ha! Here's your jacket. If we catch the bus, we should get there in 10 minutes. 1:12 p.m. The air outside is as hot and stuffy as the inside of a dryer at a laundry bar. I can feel my shirt sticking and hold my arms up as we run, so as to let the faint easterly dry me as much as possible. A bead of perspiration trickles down and hangs ignominiously off the end of my nose. "So fill me in. What's the story with this guy Picklejig? Why did Frank leave him everything? Do you even know this guy?" Brad is stomping heavily next to me, his voice shuddering with each footstep. "I don't have a clue about anything. I just did what Uncle Frank's will said and sent an email to Picklejig via his lawyers. Say, do you know this place we're going to?" "Sure, it's right here. Hey, wait up." I turn and Brad is pointing to a doorway marked Peking Palace. I take a deep breath and wipe my nose with my sleeve. "All I know, Brad, is that Fenyops Picklejig lives in Melbourne somewhere. Frank never mentioned him. First I heard of him was when I discovered that Frank wanted me to be the executor of his will. Must have been good mates, eh? Really good mates, if you know what I mean." "I'm not going to say this again, Brad. Uncle Frank wasn't gay." As we enter the dimly lit restaurant, I notice a few ancient air coolers on rusty stands blasting stale, moist air ineffectually about the room. A neatly dressed and eager waiter approaches us, and I can feel fresh beads of sweat welling in my scalp. "We have a booking in the name of Picklejig, perhaps?" "Oh, yes, sir. Young lady is already there. Come this way." We follow him on a winding path between wooden chairs occupied by corpulent businessmen spinning their lazy Susans and slurping noodles under chintzy paper-mache dragons. "Guess you must be pissed off about it all," says Brad. "I mean, why didn't Frank leave you anything? What kind of name is Fenyops Picklejig anyway? It sounds like a joke. No worse than Bradley Shitterataputis." "Oi, watch it, mate. Shitterataputis is a fine name, with a proud tradition." A waiter points to one of the tables where a woman, in a navy blue business suit, is engrossed in a file. She looks up and smiles as we approach, getting up slightly and extending her hand. "Hello, I'm Justine Shelley." I notice that her hair is long, dark, and impossibly straight, like a single sheet of silk that hangs down to the middle of her back. She has smooth tanned skin, high cheekbones, and Eurasian eyes reminiscent of polished ebony. "Dan Djurdjevic, pleased to meet you, Justine. I believe you've met my associate Brad?" "Yes, hello, Bradley." She shakes his eager hand, and Bradley flops himself down next to her, grinning like a cartoon. "Would you like some Chinese tea?" asks the waiter, and I, feeling a fresh onslaught of perspiration, hear myself saying, "Yes." "Perhaps some cold water as well. It's so hot, don't you think?" Justine dabs at her slender neck with a napkin as she speaks, but she looks perfectly cool to me. The waiter nods and retreats quickly to the kitchen. "I believe there's been a bit of a heat wave in Perth. It's been a bit like us in Melbourne too, although we don't tend to get it for as long." "No one feels the heat more than Dan here. Looks like he just put his head under a tap. He's got this sweating problem, you see." I ease myself into the seat opposite Justine and look at her through a film of steam, feeling my cheeks go red. If Justine notices my discomfort, she doesn't show it. "You know, I find it helps to run a glass of cold water over your forehead," she says, matter-of-factly. Almost on cue, the waiter reappears with glasses of iced water and places the one with the most ice in front of me. Justine picks up hers and holds it against her olive brow. "So, you act for Mr. Picklejig?" I ask, running my own glass over my forehead and feeling the cool moisture. "My firm does, yes, in most things, usually property transfers. Dan, may I call you Dan?" I nod. "Let me first say how sorry I am about your uncle. It must have been a great shock to you and your family." "Thanks, it was all very sudden." "I can only imagine. And I hate having to talk business at a time like this." I shake my head and motion that it's okay. "We'd never heard of Picklejig before, had we, Dan?" Bradley's leaning forward in his chair, turning his head from Justine to me and back like a tennis umpire. But Justine doesn't seem to notice him. "The truth is, our firm had never heard of your uncle either." She pauses while the waiter hands out menus. "So I guess we've both had surprises." "Tell us a little bit about Mr. Picklejig. Who is he? What does he do?" I'm still holding the glass to my forehead, and I notice that I'm starting to feel cooler. In fact, the trickling of sweat down my back and under my armpits appears to have stopped. "Well, I've never met him, in person that is, but I've spoken to him on the phone many times. Mr. Picklejig is a property investor, somewhat eccentric but likeable. He has this commanding way of speaking, almost as if he's physically grabbing you. At the same time, he makes you feel like you're the only person in the world." "Sounds like Uncle Frank," I say with a wry smile. "Have you spoken to Mr. Picklejig recently?" "As a matter of fact, no, not for a few months. We have standing instructions to act for him in any matter. For example, he's asked me to represent him at funerals, which is why I'm here. But he's been out of contact for some time now." "Isn't that a bit strange?" I ask. "No, not really. Mr. Picklejig travels a great deal." "He seems to have a lot in common with Uncle Frank." "Man of mystery was our Frank. We all thought he was a right boring old bastard, didn't we, Dan?" Brad is preparing to slap me on the back, but I face him with a glare, and the slap wavers, then evaporates. "It must be difficult for your whole family, the fact that he didn't... The financial side, I mean." Justine looks down, and I notice her unusually long and slender fingers and thumbs. "I think the people who most want Frank's money are the least entitled to it. I'm honored that he even mentioned me in his will. I'd swap a fortune just to have him back." The awkwardness of the following silence is saved by the waiter, who asks if we are ready to order. The truth is that I am a little peeved at Frank about the will. Well, perhaps peeved is too strong a word. Disappointed. The will has left me feeling that I was less important to him than I thought. But then again, we had drifted apart over the last few years, so I suppose I had no real claim to his primary affections. Frank had always taken an active interest in me. He wasn't the sort of uncle who would take me on fishing trips when I was a kid. "I hate fishing," Frank would say. "An enormous waste of time, no creativity being generated at all. Remember, Dan, use each moment creatively and you won't waste your life. He was the sort of uncle who had spent hours with my teenage self, teaching me the rudiments of guitar playing and recording music on an old 4-track reel-to-reel. "You have talent, Dan," he would say, and give me how-to cassettes, to which I never listened. When it came to music, Frank was caught in the late 70s and early 80s. He loved Australian artists that most of the world hadn't heard of, like Paul Kelly and Cold Chisel. More than anything, he loved the Hunters and Collectors, a band that I had also come to love. Man, their music was pure and unadulterated. They never bought into this electronic garbage. And Frank had the retro image to match, albeit he was more a throwback to the 70s with his taste for cardigans. I could still recall his favourite moth-eaten blue one, complete with patched elbows. And of course his taste for all things corduroy. As I got older, our friendship seemed to falter. I got busier at university, and Frank was frequently away. Kylie's and my wedding constituted the back-breaking straw on our friendship's camel. Frank was perfectly polite to Kylie, too polite. Only I could tell that this was a sign of Frank's utter contempt for her. To his credit, Frank never said a bad word to me about Kylie, but the openness we'd previously shared suffered as a consequence. For her own part, Kylie treated my dear old Uncle Frank as an imbecile. "He's so boring," she would lament. When he came round for dinner a few times, Frank would listen attentively to Kylie and ask all the right questions like, "So why did you choose lavender drapes?" Somehow, Kylie was never satisfied. "He's just too nice, don't you think? He doesn't have anything interesting to say. What did you two ever talk about?" 2:21 p.m. "Mate," Brad says far too loudly as we walk towards the bus stop. "She wants you. I could see it." "Shut up, Brad. Plain as day, she's got the hots for you. She's got 'em bad." Anyone ever tell you what an arsehole you can be? "What? I'm just telling it like it is. Do you realise how cranky you've been lately? Sheesh, I'm starting to get a bit hurt, you know. All you ever do is bite my head off." Just lay off the innuendo. I'm not in the mood. The sea breezes come in and I savour the cooling blast. "'Cause you've been through a lot, I'll forgive you." I say nothing. "So when are you seeing her again?" "Brad, she goes back to Melbourne this afternoon. I won't be seeing her again, period." "I suppose it's just as well. No point leading her on." I wasn't leading anyone on. "I noticed you didn't wear your ring. You're quite a crafty fellow, aren't you?" "You know I often don't wear my ring." Sure. Isn't it like bad luck to take your wedding ring off?" "That's what Kylie thinks. Don't tell her, okay?" "Hey, mate, my lips are sealed." Brad makes a zipper signal across his mouth. "You get a number?" "For crying out loud, you were there. What do you think? Look, from here on she doesn't need to get involved, except in some paperwork." In retrospect, it was clear that there hadn't been any need for the meeting. Over lunch, we talked briefly about Uncle Frank's assets, and I promised to send Justine a complete list by the end of the following week. But in reality, there wasn't any hurry. The transfers could only be done after probate, which would take months at least. The rest of the meeting comprised a chat I found myself thoroughly enjoying. Even now, I can't stop thinking of Justine's surprisingly raucous laugh, the way she rested her chin on her palms, elbows casually on the table, dark eyes focused intently, and the reassuring hand she ever so briefly placed on mine. "You sure Frank wasn't hiding something?" "Eh?" I turned to Brad, who's dropped a step behind. "Everyone thought he was loaded." No. Like I said, he had his house and his car, bugger all in his bank accounts, some personal effects. I have to make a visit to his place and check it all out." "How are you going to get in?" Frank was pretty organised. He left a key with his will and some specific instructions on what I should do with his security system, everything. A Central Area Transit bus winds its way to a stop in front of us, and some sour-looking patrons shoulder their way out of its air-conditioned interior. 6:34 p.m. I steer my car onto the grass-raised paving of our driveway. Over the road I see Leanne's parked Hyundai Excel and groan inwardly. I ritually avert my gaze from the frayed cocos palms that bend steeply in the sea breeze, but unfortunately look straight into the eyes of my neighbour, Jim from New Zealand, who waves an enthusiastic hello. His garden is, by contrast to ours, a picture of health, albeit some part is always in a state of major works. "Hi there, Jim," I say as I get out of the car. "Choice, bro. How's things?" "Okay, looks like you're getting ready to do something big out here," I say, pointing to the huge mounds of yellow sand that have been dumped on the verge. "Yeah, been having a real trial with this front lawn. You know how we lowered it all by 20 centimetres? Had to take up the grass, dug up the soil, get rid of it, put back the grass. Well, we decided to raise the lawn up again. Gonna have to take up the grass, put down some soil, put back the grass. Reckon it'll take a few weekends, eh?" "I see. Also gonna have to break up that concrete slab I put down. That's why I got the pneumatic drill. Put some pavers down instead, should be choice." "I reckon. Well, I'll be seeing you, Jim." "Yeah, mate, cheers." I open the front door and hear Leanne saying, "Look!" before she squeals with laughter. "And look at Brad!" shouts Yvonne, another squeal. "Hi there, girls." "Oh, hi, Dan," says Kylie without looking up. Yvonne and Leanne, who are squeezed in on either side of her, say nothing as they stare at her iPhone. "What are you looking at?" "Pictures from New Year's Eve." Yvonne wipes a tear from her right eye. "They're so funny." "But I heard you mention Brad. I thought it was another girls-only night." "He just happened to be at the pub," says Kylie, waving in my general direction. "Here he is at it again." Yet another joint squeal, and Leanne shakes both hands furiously with her eyes tightly shut. "Well, I'll be in the spare room if you need me," I say, but none of the girls respond. "The spare room is where I keep my personal effects. You can make as much mess as you like in there with your toys," Kylie said at the beginning. "In fact, I desperately want to clean it up, to make it my space where I can feel comfortable and indulge in my hobbies, though the truth is I barely have time to dump things in the room and run. Working at Dixon, Cox and Peters takes up almost every one of my waking hours. And so I experience the same rising sense of despair every time I open the door, noting the ever-increasing depth of the layer of dust covering practically everything. I keep my clothes in the cupboard, since the walk-in wardrobe of our bedroom is assigned entirely to my wife's extensive clothing collection. My toys consist of my collection of Hunters and Collectors CDs, my computer, a cheap electric guitar, and the bank of 70s effects pedals Frank salvaged from a junk pile when he was visiting Japan. "You know," Frank used to say, "you can either pay a fortune to create the sound these babies make, or you pay nothing at all." As a birthday gift, he arranged them all neatly on a particle board base. In 10 years, I had used them only a handful of times. Has it really been 10 years? Looking at the dust-covered pedal board, I remember a question I meant to ask Frank. If light is reflected in a mirror to produce a back-to-front image, what happens to sound? Is its mirror image also back-to-front? And if so, how does it differ from the original sound? Scientists like Frank with an interest in music must have known the answer, but somehow I never got to ask him, and now it's too late. I hear and feel the teeth-grinding, foundation-shaking start-up of the pneumatic drill just outside my window. At least Frank could have left me the 4-track recorder and his guitars, I think, wondering whether they would be appreciated by Fenyop's Picklejig. Maybe Picklejig would consider selling them to me. A quick glance at the in-tray tells me that this is unlikely, for the simple reason that I wouldn't be able to offer any money. The bills sit high in the tray, where I've asked Kylie to put all official correspondence. The fact that Kylie frequently forgets to put things in there makes me even more nervous. Flicking through the top few papers, I can see numerous department store and boutique accounts. The credit card balance sheet is clearly at its limit. Even the telephone bill is double what it was last month, not to mention Kylie's mobile account immediately beneath that. The door is slightly ajar, and Bugsy slinks through, meowing a greeting against the thumping backdrop. I pick him up, holding him so that our noses touch, an affection that Bugsy only extends to me. He's a strange cat. In fact, we sleep kind of cheek to cheek, something that Kylie, who wears earplugs and an eye mask to bed, is scarcely aware of.